Step forward, Saren Korin. Earth recognizes you. The ceremony chamber vibrated with decorum, not sound. Voices didn't echo here. They landed with weight, suspended in the still air like stones dropped into oil. The boy moved, barefoot, on the cold alabaster tile, each footfall leaving faint smudges of life no protocol could scrub out. Around him towered marble banners, inscribed with the philosophies of civilizations that spanned thousands of star systems. The Galactic Concordium's first mind ceremony wasn't just tradition, it was spectacle, evaluation, and judgment in ceremonial silk. Above, an arch of plasma light traced the crest of each attending species. Eyes multi-lidded, insectile, glassy, glowing, watched from every tier, and at the center of it all, a 9-year-old boy with dirt under his nails stood still. No pre-written scroll, no elegant translation drone humming nearby, just a child, bruised knees visible beneath formal threads, a faint scar slicing his brow from some earthly scrape. Saren raised his eyes. "We fell," he began, voice dry as an old blade. "Therefore we rose." Somewhere in the upper balconies, a Koloth trader shifted uncomfortably. "We broke," he continued, his voice catching, not from fear, but memory. "We bled, not for glory, not for songs, just to stand, and we're still standing." The Drethari emissary's 4 fingers curled tighter around his staff. "Hope doesn't come in silver. It comes in fists clutching rope, knuckles split open pulling each other out." Silence followed like a held breath before lightning. Saren's gaze met the crowd. "That's what made us. The breaking, the blood, not simulation or code, just hurt, stitched with stubbornness." At the edge of the delegate ring, General Thavrik Mull's eyes narrowed, obsidian cold beneath a chrome-braided brow. "This isn't an air," the Zenvar warlord barked, rising from his seat. His boots clicked across the sacred stone. "It's a weakling's cry, wrapped in theater." Mull's footsteps shattered the silence like hammers to glass. No one stopped him. No guard moved. Not even the Concordium speaker stirred beneath his ivory mask. Saren didn't step back. The sound was sharp, the kind of violence too clean to be accidental. Mull's armored palm struck Saren's cheek with the force of contempt, not war. The boy's head snapped sideways, his lips split, and a bead of red bloomed brilliant and raw, on flawless white. Gasps stuttered across the tiers, not from horror, from disbelief that it happened here, now. Saren slowly turned his face forward. The blood smeared across his cheek like war paint. He didn't raise his hands, didn't cry. Instead he looked up at Mull, voice steady. "Peace isn't free," he said. "It's earned." Behind the Earth delegation's polished visor screens, no one spoke, no alarm, no retaliation. They just watched. Reth Velarn's fingers, beneath his table, tightened on a weathered ring worn smooth by time. He didn't blink. He'd served in the forgotten colonies, knew what came next, didn't need a gun. General Mull scoffed. "Earth sends a child to speak, and this is the echo we receive." But no one laughed. The Zenvar command circle remained still, 3 admirals and a high seer exchanging glances that didn't match their leader's disdain. Somewhere in the side tiers, a Zoric youth lowered his head. His elder nudged him, whispered something not meant for translation. Saren wiped his mouth on his sleeve. The blood left a streak across the cuff. From his perch, the Concordium speaker finally moved. Slowly, he struck the ceremonial chime with 2 fingers. The tone that followed was soft, almost indifferent. "The presentation has been witnessed," he intoned. That was it. No reprimand, no censure, just ritual continuing like nothing happened. Saren turned and walked back to Earth's position. Each step traced his earlier path in reverse, but now the marble bore evidence, red, smeared, honest. He sat wordlessly beside Velarn, who glanced down just once. "You kept your line," the old strategist whispered. Saren stared forward. So did he. Velarn allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "Difference is yours was earned." The ceremony pressed on. Next came the Elruthians, presenting a genetically synchronized quartet who recited 4-part harmony while rotating in 0 gravity. The crowd clapped politely. But the silence that had followed Earth's presentation lingered like smoke, clinging, sour, refusing to fade. 3 rows back, Varric watched through flickering eye implants, recording micro-gestures. He caught the twitch in a Zenvar commander's temple. logged the twitch of a Drethari delegate's jaw when Saren bled. Every fragment mattered. Beside him, Auric jotted single words on a paper slate, obsolete tech, untraceable, words like rupture, throat, mirror, and ghostline. He circled one, scrap metal soul. Across the room, Torv leaned against a column, chewing something bitter, eyes flicking not to the stage but to the structural beams overhead. He noted exits, blind angles, how the light bent across stone. A pilot sees through structures, even if he never intends to land. Above them, Reth Velarn didn't watch the performers anymore. His gaze was fixed on the Zenvar high table, calculating, not rage, just the equation of power and its eventual burial. In the corner of Earth's deck, a young liaison tried to type a report. His hands trembled too much. Reth didn't look at him. A whisper passed between two Drethari advisors. Strike a child, in front of the galaxy. They forget what chains feel like. They will remember. The ceremony concluded with the Akini spiral dancers, twisting light with their bodies until it painted their origin myths across the chamber ceiling. But all anyone remembered from that day was the color red. In the corridor beyond the chamber, footsteps rang different, sharper. The pageantry was over. Delegates filed out. Eyes refused to meet. The Zenvar walked with the clipped march of injured pride. General Mole's expression remained unmoved, but the lack of applause that followed him spoke louder than his rank. Reth waited until Earth's group reached the external corridor. The silence around them wasn't absence, it was gathering. He finally turned to Saren. "You'll have a scar." The boy wiped his sleeve again, leaving a second smear. "Good," Reth nodded. "Then let's write the rest of the wound where it counts." He turned, cloak dragging across a crack in the marble. Small, hairline, but spreading. They left without ceremony. No applause, no banners. Just a child with blood on his cheek, and a plan forming behind a soldier's smile. By the time the Earth delegation shuttle lifted from the platform, 3 Zenvar warships had adjusted orbital positions by 0.4 degrees, subtle, defensive. They didn't know it yet, but they'd already started retreating. They watched us bleed, and they wrote nothing. Reth Velarn's voice didn't rise. He said it flat, like a fact scrawled into the back of an old knife. The door behind them hissed shut, sealing the Earth delegation's chamber in silence colder than any battlefield he'd stood on. No brass, no banners, just recycled air and judgment still drying on the boy's sleeve. Saren sat to the side, legs swinging above the floor, the split in his lip beginning to scab. No one tried to clean it. The room wasn't for comfort. It was for moves. On the wall, a laser plasma display flickered to life, lines of red and silver webbing through known territory, like veins on ancient parchment. The Concordium seal pulsed in the corner, dull and bloated. Reth ignored it. The slap was never just skin, he continued, eyes tracking invisible patterns across the map. It hit every man watching, and every child who'll hear of it in fragments. A low breath escaped from Varric, leaning half-shadowed near the auxiliary panel, arms crossed. His coat was stitched with synthetic thread from 50 trade systems, none of them his own. He always looked like he was wearing someone else's war. "I've already spliced their security timestamp," Varric said, voice dry. Maul's outburst triggered 5 sub-directives in the Zenvar Palace chain. One involved locking down public comms. That's fear, not discipline. Reth turned. "Good. You're not here to decode behavior. You're here to break it." Across the room, a figure coughed. Jano, hunched on the edge of a repurposed crate, set down a rusted flask. His beard was gray from minerals, not time. His left arm clicked as it moved, an old graft from the Arxen mines that never aligned quite right. His voice was gravel soaked in oil. "You want in," Jano said, tapping a finger against his temple. "We go low, not through their shields, but under their pride. Zenvar think chaos is noise, but we sing in it." Reth half smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "That's why you're here." He tapped the chessboard embedded in the table. The surface cracked diagonally from an old pressure fracture. The pieces were mismatched, some human, others sculpted from salvaged alloys. He moved one. The opening's made. "Now we build." The door hissed again, and the poet entered. Auric was younger than the others, but carried himself like a man made entirely of memory. His eyes were sunken but sharp, like daggers left cooling in sand. He didn't bow or greet, Just walked in, tore off his scarf, and let it drop on the floor like a verdict. They're quoting Siren on the outer fringe already, he said. But not the Concordium feeds, local pirate stations, prison loops, refugee barges. Where we needed it most, said Reth. Auric gave a tired shrug. Pain recognizes pain. That boy spoke like a wound with lungs. Reth glanced at Siren, still quiet, fingers curled under the edge of his seat, like he needed to hold on to gravity itself. We will weaponize the memory of that moment, but not loudly, not yet. The map updated. Trade routes began to stutter. Anomalies pinged in border zones. The fault lines were visible, just not named. Then came Torv. He stepped in wearing a coat stitched from military banners he'd stolen, boots that had once belonged to a Kolith officer. His eyes burned with the same hue as scorched steel under rain. No security detail clocked me, he said, dropping a cracked datapuck onto the table. I ghosted past 3 Zenvar guards. You shouldn't have been able to, said Varric. I shouldn't have done a lot of things, Torv replied, then grinned. Yet here I am. Reth sat, not on the chair at the center, but the one near the side, slightly lower, slightly worn, deliberately so. It was how he thought best at an angle. This is not war, he said, fingers laced. We're not drawing battle plans, no fleets, no official moves. He tapped the puck. It projected the image of Cravexel, the Zenvar sacred moon, its surface cratered with ancient installations, glimmering with ceremonial glyphs, a symbol of order, untouched for generations. What is this? Asked Jano, leaning forward. Endgame, said Reth. But we don't start there. We start at the fault lines. He pointed toward the outer rim sectors. The Zorik chafe under rule but follow honor. That slap broke something ceremonial. For them it's not strategy, it's shame. He moved again. The Drethari carry history like chains made of heat. They see Mol's hand and hear old whips. They'll move if we give them a roar to follow. And the Kolith, Auric asked. They see numbers, logistics. When emotion costs credits, it becomes a liability. We'll make the Zenvar expensive. Torv leaned against the wall, picking at a scar across his knuckle. So we feed ghosts into the machine. No, said Reth. We remind them that machines break. The cracked data slate on the table chimed. Varric muttered something under his breath, and ran a hand across it. They've already blocked the ceremony feed. Only internal networks allowed to rebroadcast. Which means they're scared of the replay, said Auric. Good, we'll make it play in their sleep. Reth stood. His coat shifted, weighted with metals long stripped of meaning. He walked to the center of the room, then knelt, opened a small case embedded in the floor. Inside, fragments of paper, torn from banned texts, wrapped around human names, long forgotten in diplomatic halls. He took one out, passed it to Siren. Read it when we leave, he said. It's not for now. Siren looked up. His voice, quiet, still carried weight. Will this fix anything? Reth answered without turning. No, but it will change everything. Each man in the room felt the air tilt, not from prophecy, but from inevitability. Plans were born not in fire, but in silence, loaded with intention. Name it, said Varric. Projects need names. Reth glanced at the broken chessboard. Shearpoint. Auric nodded slowly. Fitting. A break, not a blast. Torv smirked. I prefer the blast part. You'll get it, said Reth. Eventually, outside the chamber, footsteps echoed as the Concordium's next procedural meeting began, sterile and irrelevant. They wouldn't know until too late that Earth's reply had already left the table, not with fleets, but with 4 ghosts and 1 boy. Each man rose. Each would carry a piece of the story forward, not as heroes, but as errors too wild to program, too human to erase. And somewhere in the dark beyond orbit, Cravexel waited, still whole. For now. They built gods out of numbers, Varric muttered, fingers twitching over the cracked interface. So I gave their gods cancer. The room was dark, dead dark, lit only by thin veins of data threading through the air like liquid nerves. No ceremony here, no symbols carved in stone, just pulsing lines, unspoken oaths, and a silence dense enough to suffocate breath. The Zenvar archive didn't exist on any map, not officially, buried beneath bureaucratic layers, encrypted through dialects nobody even spoke aloud anymore. It wasn't protected by walls, it was buried beneath vanity and assumption. That was its flaw. Varric didn't blink. His pupils dilated and contracted with every surge of false access. Codes broke like glass under boot heels. Not smashed, cut clean, left to slice whoever tried to follow. He moved with purpose. No flair, no rhythm. His fingers crawled across the keys like spiders chasing prey they'd already poisoned. Each keystroke injected a lie so close to truth, it could only be believed. The screen glitched, briefly. A DNA helix trembled into view, colors warping, pixels decaying at the edges. Base pair chains rewrote themselves in front of him, less science than ritual. The new code wasn't elegant. It wasn't meant to be. It hurt to look at. "Run it again," he whispered. Beside him, the drone node stuttered, repeating the visual. A strand of artificial purity twisting into something brittle, unstable. He added jitter, subtle audio warble, a breathing rhythm beneath the visuals. Not quite human, but not quite machine. The message: Zenvar lineage is synthetic, programmed, failing. One report said half the upper caste were born without genetic drift. Another stated cellular replication began degrading after the second generation. Fertility mods, once classified, suddenly appeared incomplete. None of it true, all of it believable. Varric dragged the files into a public diplomacy feed cam, rewired the authentication tags, made it look like it came from inside a Zenvar census office, not outside. That was the hook. "They won't believe it at first," came Oryx's voice from the far corner, muffled beneath a threadbare hood, fingers ink-stained, still writing. "But that's not the point. Doubt isn't a door, it's a leak." Varric leaned back. "Let it flood." Oryx rose and approached the secondary console, brushing aside used data slates. He held out a small tablet. "These are the words. Stylized, scattered, half poem, half psalm, no title." He didn't recite it aloud. The words had more power when discovered alone, whispered between hands, replayed in private. It began. "They said their blood was blueprint, untainted by fracture, but I saw the blue flicker in their eyes, and it was too clean." The verse flowed like oil down cold metal, laced with dissonance. It hinted at something beneath the myth of Zenvar perfection, that their strength wasn't heritage, but imitation, manufactured courage wrapped in algorithmic fear. Oryx fed the lines through a translator glitch tool, one that slightly mistranslated key terms across different systems, enough to create a kaleidoscope of meanings. In Zoric, it read as weakness. In Drethari tongues, it suggested false ancestry. Among the Kalith, it implied economic fraud. They didn't send it through Concordium channels. They fed it into Scrapcom arrays, the ancient trade networks, forgotten repeaters, hiding in asteroid junkyards. The feeds that carried gossip, smuggler tales, and songs sung in exile. Within an hour, the visual strand, the corrupted helix, began surfacing on Rim-World news feeds. No logos, no attribution, just static-laced video, followed by Oryx verse, burned into screen corners like prophecy. The drones speak not because they're silent, but because their mouths were made without depth. Varric closed his eyes, listened. The console buzzed with a new frequency, not audible, but heavy. The lie was moving, slower than truth, but deeper. The kind of thought that nested whispered at night. He turned to the wall. A laser plasma display painted a glowing cluster of Zenvar command colonies. Blue markers began blinking along the outer ring, not alarms, patterns. "They're logging internal audits," Varric said, "unscheduled. 5. No press notes, no policy updates. They're scared of ghosts," Oryx replied, "because they buried so many to build their thrones." The door hissed open. Reth Velarn stepped in, the soft leather of his coat muting footsteps. He scanned the room once, eyes landing on the corrupted DNA strand still cycling on the screen. "Where'd it start?" he asked. Varric didn't answer immediately. He opened a console file, showed the initial breach point, Zenvar Academy of Reproductive Sciences, then cross-linked it to 2 policy shifts from 2 decades prior. From there, the false trail expanded naturally. Real dates, real names, real signatures, all bent around a single lie. "You gave them an illness with evidence," Reth said. "I gave them proof they never had," Varric corrected. "That's the art." Reth folded his arms. "What do you expect them to do? They'll deny, then investigate, then lie differently, which makes the first lie feel real. Outside the chamber, somewhere beneath the crust of a forgotten mining moon, a Zorik technician watched the strand replay again. He said nothing, just rewound it, played it again. His son watched over his shoulder. In orbit, a mid-tier Zenvar officer forwarded the footage to her superior. The reply came back, "Do not circulate. This is Concordium sabotage. Disregard." But the officer downloaded the file before deleting it. On a trade port, a Kalith merchant froze the video, zoomed in on the sequence. The flicker, barely visible, just a frame. He smiled, teeth yellowed, and muttered, "Perfection doesn't twitch." Back in the chamber, Auric added the final touch. He fed a corrupted nursery rhyme into old Zenvar propaganda bots, dormant, meant for loyalty conditioning. The bots reactivated and began pushing the verse across outdated education forums. One stanza repeated at odd intervals. They carved children from code, then forgot to give them fear. Now they stand still, not brave, but unknowing. Reth nodded once. "Good. Keep it strange. Strange sticks. They'll blame us eventually," Varric said. "They'll know it was us," Reth corrected, "but they can't say it, not without admitting they're vulnerable." He looked to the side of the table. One of the cracked chess pieces had fallen during the process. A knight, broken at the neck, lay face down beside a black bishop. Reth picked it up, pocketed it. "I want the Zorik to question legacy," he said, "the Drethari to mock bloodlines, the Kalith to see risk in association. I don't want them angry. I want them unsure." "Then we're done here," Auric said, wiping ink from his fingers. "No," Reth said. "Now we wait." They left the room one by one, lights fading behind them. No celebration, no announcement, just a fading visual, still looping. The helix twists, but it's hollow inside, and the soundless suspicion now blooming across an empire that had never known doubt until a child bled on marble. "You bring us art?" the Zorik quartermaster asked, tilting his head, antenna twitching with distaste. "Or weapons?" Jano stepped down from the smuggler bay's access ramp, boots striking iron with a muted thud. He didn't smile, didn't posture, he just gestured to the crates behind him. Wood panels scorched in places, corners sealed with molten resin and human fingerprints. No shine, no branding. "Art kills slower," he said, then unlocked the first latch with a grunt. The lid hissed as it peeled back, revealing a tightly packed mess of homemade rifles, jagged coils, welded by hand. Some still smelled of engine grease and rusted rain. Zorik stared. "These aren't clean. That's the point." Jano's fingers were blistered from the forge. His voice rasped from recycled ship air and old smog. "Zenvar-like balance. These tilt the scale." The alien touched a weapon's grip, recoiling slightly. "It vibrates. Earth's circuit. Runs on decay. Feedback loop burns out after 2 rounds. Use it before it kills itself." The quartermaster whistled low through the side of his neck folds, a sign of both warning and interest. "Why give this to us?" "You saw what Mole did." Jano stepped closer, tone low. "You think he stops at one child? Wait until your offspring read history, rewritten by his fist." The alien considered, then nodded once. The crate closed. Payment Old Blood Inc. Kalith Chits was transferred silently through a shared node. Back aboard his hauler, Jano wiped grime off his forehead with a bandage already stained. He leaned over the console, checked the nav route for the next drop. Drethare sector, more dangerous, less subtle. He tapped the comm. "Torv, what's the wind like near Harik's fracture?" The line buzzed before answering. Torv's voice came rough and amused, like someone who'd seen too many crash sites to worry about turbulence. "Calm enough if you drift sideways and blind the sensors with trash heat." Jano grunted. "Got one more drop. Home-cooked fireworks for Drethare teeth." "Send me the fuse specs," Torv replied. "I'll line your path with ghosts." As Jano's ship disappeared into warp, half a sector away, Auric was laying groundwork of his own, words not steel. The propaganda seed had already bloomed. Now he fertilized it with silence. On sub-carrier channels, untraceable burst transmissions reached Drethare enclaves. Contained inside blueprints for improvised bomb jackets, made from repurposed mining belts, volatile ore compounds, stabilized by friction gel. Dangerous, unstable, effective. Attached was a single line, composed in Auric's jagged Earth script. Burn what once bound you, light it with the bones they left you to break. The Drethare didn't ask where it came from, they only tested it. 12 hours later, at the fringe of Zarek-controlled territory, a Zenvar patrol cruiser drifted into dock orbit. Routine check. Civilian vessel approaching with clearance tags from a merchant armada, except the vessel didn't respond to standard scans. Inside its cockpit, nothing but ash and wire. The blast wasn't enormous, just targeted. A clean rupture through the port stabilizer, followed by a cascade implosion that cracked its gravity core. The cruiser folded inward like a closing eye, then split in two. On a backwater channel, the video leaked. No commentary, no symbol, just a timestamp and a freeze frame of the explosion caught from a neighboring salvage drone. Flames spiraled like thread pulled through cloth. Varric watched it play on his heads-up display, seated cross-legged in a stasis hub rigged with a chaos harness. His fingertips sparked occasionally as he rewrote 2 lines of Zenvar system logs to suggest mechanical failure, not attack. They'll blame the pilot, he muttered. They'll argue about quality control, delay the inquiry. Enough delay. Reth's voice came from the main comm. They don't need to believe it was sabotage. They need to suspect it might be. In the shadowed alley of a Drethare outpost, a young mechanic wiped his hands on his apron and eyed the crate he wasn't supposed to receive. A neighbor had delivered it with no explanation, just said, "Someone remembered your brother." Inside, a detonation harness, built from scavenged earth drive cores, duct mesh, and cracked fuel cells. The mechanic touched the wiring. It trembled slightly, like it recognized him. By the 3rd day, the cracks had become fractures. Zenvar High Command issued a containment directive, reassigning patrol routes, restricting public transmissions, and deploying internal behavior auditors to high-risk sectors. That same day, in one of those redacted sectors, a Drethare warband stormed a Zenvar depot using one of the improvised weapons. No demands, no broadcast, just entry, ignition, fire. Torv flew overhead in a battered skiff, watching from the clouds. He hadn't fired a shot. He just tracked the blast signatures, recorded the burn patterns, and noted how many Zenvar gunships scrambled in the wrong direction. He keyed the line to Reth. "The dogs are chasing echoes, then keep throwing stones," Reth answered. "Each ripple weakens the reflection." In a dim chamber back on Earth, Reth stood before a low-lit map. Red beads marked detonations, white flickers tracked patrol shifts. He turned to Saren, seated nearby, sketching something in chalk on the back wall. "You understand what this means, don't you?" Reth asked. Saren didn't stop drawing. "They're afraid of dirt, not just explosions." Reth waited. "We gave their enemies weapons, but we also reminded them they can fight." A pause. "Good," said Reth. "Now we bury the idea so deep, even the Zenvar don't know where it started." Outside, in the quiet between worlds, a cargo pod drifted past a defense grid. It wasn't scanned, it wasn't tracked. Inside were 10 more crates. Each one carried the same label, etched in dried ink. "Ash is what's left after control burns away." And under that, a symbol not seen in Concordium history archives, a cracked Earth flag, stitched to a boot print. Just one. No footsteps, no message, only fire in the vents, and hands that had finally decided to burn back. "They trade in numbers," Auric muttered, dragging ink across vellum scavenged from a ruined monastery. "So we feed them numbers with teeth." The chamber was bare except for the glowing pulse of a low-band emitter rigged to a scavenged headrest. Walls were soundproofed with stitched cargo banners, dyed black to erase their pasts. A laser plasma panel hovered beside him, cycling through intercepted Kalith merchant codes, trade timelines, and Zenvar command updates. He didn't glance at it, just listened. To patterns, to breaks between them. Reth entered quietly, boots carrying the dust of too many border worlds. He watched the ink spread across the paper, curving symbols, angled deliberately to resemble Zenvar military syntax, but just disjointed enough to spark suspicion. "How real does it need to feel?" Auric asked without turning. "Not real," Reth said. "Just earned." Auric nodded, dipped the stylus again. The text read like a classified purge memo, an internal Zenvar directive ordering the removal of unreliable merchant limbs across 7 systems. The phrasing was sterile, clinical, familiar. That was the hook. He paired it with another scroll, this one handwritten in broken Kalith dialect. It described mass audits, revocations of trading licenses, shipping delays with no warning, whispers of disappearances, no names, only patterns. He bound them with black string, rubbed ash along the edges to mimic fire damage, and sealed them in a cracked trade pouch, once belonging to a dead envoy. It was theater, but effective theater lived on flaws, not polish. Later that evening, the pouch arrived in a gambling hall on Vestry Prime. It was left beneath a table, unnoticed, until a half-drunk freight captain found it. Curiosity wasn't the danger, disbelief was, but the first thing he did was show it to 2 others. Within 2 hours, it had spread across 7 comm loops. No one shouted, no one warned, they just stopped sending. Zenvar shipment requests began to pile up, untouched. In one exchange ring, 3 freighters diverted mid-route, citing storm paths, a lie no one bothered to confirm. Another port refused to refuel a Zenvar gunship. Officially, it was technical constraints. Unofficially, the loading crews wouldn't approach the vessel. Varric monitored the heads-up feed from a rotating relay station, built into an asteroid's bones. His display flickered as more nodes went dark. He grinned, though his eyes stayed cold. "They're pulling out faster than I expected," he muttered. "Didn't think they'd flinch this soon." Oryx's reply came through static-wrapped comms. "They're traders, not believers. The myth was money. Break the belief, the coin falls flat." In the inner circles of Calith hierarchy, the silence was louder than panic. Counselors began closing vaults, canceling long-standing contracts without explanation. The old merchant routes shimmered with reroutes and ghost signals. They weren't defying the Zenvar. They were simply disengaging. But disengagement, in the trade world, was betrayal by subtraction. Reth observed from a distance, monitoring traffic flux through red-mapped overlays. Every dip wasn't just economic, it was a cut into Zenvar stability. The Dominion prided itself on control. Trade kept their reach sharp. Without it, their grasp loosened. And somewhere in the back alleys of Jectra Sprawl, Oryx scattered his final pieces. He paid a barkeep in rusted Concordium credits to recite a chant over a black market broadcast. The chant mimicked an ancient Zenvar induction rite, altered slightly, just enough, so that it now implied cleansing of merchant bloodlines, exile of non-native traders, quarantine of tainted assets. The voice broadcast was gravel raw, nearly whispered. "They will strip you bare in ink before they touch you in fire." The line repeated. Once, that was enough. In the Calith Hall of Balance, a parchment scroll arrived. No return crest, no seal. It contained only names, real ones. Traders who had recently gone missing in Zenvar sectors. Dozens, paired with a clipped sentence. Assets redirected due to ideological drift. Whether forged or not didn't matter. A scroll with just enough familiarity could drown reason in suggestion. Back in the Earth command nest, Torv watched the charts buckle. 4 routes vanished overnight, he said, lounging upside down in a worn grav chair. "Zenvar won't know whether to patch holes or plug spies." "They'll do both," Reth said, tapping a stylus against a deck rail, "and in doing so, lose half their crew to fear." Jono entered without a word, dropped a satchel onto the console. Inside, actual Zenvar data cubes, corrupted and filled with mixed scripts, leaked real policy drafts spliced with Oryx forgeries. The truth inside was indistinguishable from the sabotage. "From the vault of a dead liaison," Jono said. "He won't be needing clarity." Oryx smirked. "Mixing truth into lies is easy. Making truth look like a lie, that's the kill stroke." By week's end, Zenvar Command deployed audit teams to 5 Calith trade worlds, not to reassure, but to investigate. That was the final fracture. Trade halted, not officially, not through declarations, just gone. Oryx read the reports from a street cafe on Tyron Drift, sipping broth from a cracked mug, watching a Zenvar emissary argue with a port clerk who refused to grant docking codes. He tore a slip of bark from the table's edge, scrawled a note. When the gods stopped speaking, the traders remembered who fed them. Later, he left it pinned to a transport crate headed for the Calith Council. It didn't need to be signed. They knew who it came from, or rather, who it didn't. And that difference, that flicker between attribution and absence, was what made the story take root. Zenvar's economy hadn't collapsed yet, but every deal lost its certainty. Every handshake began to tremble. Every gain felt borrowed. And no system survives long when belief exits before currency. In the quiet between storms, Earth didn't press forward. It watched, as profit turned to pause, and fear began to tally its own accounts. "Cut the relay. Cut it now," snarled Admiral Volk Thesser, slamming his clawed hand against the data terminal as static overtook the Council's laser feed. The image had been meant to reassure: Kilith traders signing reaffirmed routes, Zoric nobles receiving economic concessions, but the loop glitched, rewound, and replayed the moment the delegates turned away. In the corner of the Zenvar command chamber, a blue emblem blinked erratically, broadcast piracy. Again. The feed died. 4 council chairs remained occupied. 2 were empty. 1 rotated slowly, as if waiting for a spine to return. High Chancellor Vexel turned from the failed feed, voice low. Ice poured into structure. "We cannot contain this by editing footage. Our command grid was designed for compliance. It's now echoing uncertainty." General Maul, still bruised from diplomatic silence after the incident with Saren, stood by the panoramic viewport, watching the fractured starscape like it had betrayed him. His expression was carved from old fury. "They fear illusions, then we give them truth." His words scraped the air. "Deploy twin task forces, 1 for Drethery, 1 for Zoric, public sweeps, arrests, controlled retribution." "You want visibility?" Vexel asked, turning. "When our own transport ships are being denied passage, fear only grows when you let it fester, and empire only breaks when you swing blind." Beneath them, beyond their debate, ash rained over Sector 9. A Drethery militia, their faces streaked in oil and soot, had reduced a Zenvar supply station to black husks. The assault wasn't elegant, it was a scream made fire. They didn't claim responsibility, they didn't need to. They marched over their own flame, chanting in a dialect the Concordium hadn't logged in decades. Oryx's altered verse had reached them, not in messages, but in old hymns repurposed for revenge. In a storage room nearby, Torv crouched behind a fractured stabilizer, watching it unfold through a small viewport crack. His drone camera drifted low, capturing the final moments of the depot collapsing inward. The flames were sharp, angular, dancing like things with bone. He spoke into his comm quietly. "That's 3 confirmed, 2 more rising." Reth's voice answered, slower now. "Send the footage, leak only 1, let the others live as rumor." Elsewhere, a Zoric administrator slammed a fist into his terminal, watched his outer colony feeds fade to silence. The militia there had locked the landing pads. Civil patrols refused orders. His calls bounced back like insults. The soldiers wore no banners, but their insignias were marked with faint red stains, human blood repurposed as warning. The administrator's second-in-command whispered, "We haven't trained them for betrayal." "No," he muttered, "but they trained each other for it." Back in the Zenvar Council Hall, Admiral Thesser raised a shaking hand toward the overhead laser map. 17 disconnections in 4 cycles. Kulith fleet movement erratic. No cargo manifests. "They're gone." "Then replace them," snapped Maul. "With what?" asked Chancellor Vexel. "Loyalty? You can't buy what's already been burned." General Maul turned away, refusing to show the way. His jaw tightened. Beneath his armor, his pulse spike was visible, beating too fast for comfort. His strength, always postured, now betrayed by the body beneath. A courier approached, handing over a black-etched data shard. Vexel inserted it into the council table interface. The plasma surface projected a compilation of intercepted conversations, all anonymous. "Zenvar purge quotas don't include Kulith. They just make them vanish. Audit after audit, then the names disappear. My uncle disappeared in orbit. They said the logs were corrupted. I won't load for them. Not again. Not after the missing." The Chancellor watched it finish. "Your truth is a blade, Maul. You've swung it so wide it's cutting your own wrists." Maul growled low. "I did what was required." "No," said Vexel, "you did what was remembered." Across from them, the third counselor, a figure rarely addressed, more shadow than presence, stood and walked out. No statement, no farewell, just silence, and an empty chair, spinning slowly. In the lower barracks, a Zenvar commander tried to rally his regiment. "Every false broadcast is an insult. Our duty is clarity. Loyalty. Hold your ground." A soldier in the back spat near his boot. The man next to him didn't report it. In orbit, A Zenvar freighter tried to dock at a Cullith orbital ring. Denied. No reason given. Back in the command nest, Reth Velarn watched the trade routes die one by one, not with fire, not with force, just omission. He stood before a mural depicting Earth's first embassy ship, painted years ago with chipped strokes. In its day, it had been mocked. Now, its shadow fell over Zenvar pride, like prophecy. Saren stood near the mural's edge, tracing his finger along a crack running through the paint. "They're loud when they feel strong," the boy said, voice quiet. "But now they whisper like corners." "They still have fleets," Reth replied. "They don't have belief." Reth looked over his shoulder. "Then we press the mirror until it shatters." Back in the Zenvar war chamber, General Mull ordered full mobilization. Vessels scrambled, drones launched, patrols tripled, but none of it hit anything. Because no enemy waited on a battlefield, only shadows in the mirror, lies that sounded too much like truth. Truth twisted just enough to look like guilt, and a council that once ruled without question now asked everything. Too late. Behind the silence, Earth watched, and waited for the next crack to open wide. "Keep the exit hatch loose," Torb barked into the comm as he slammed a wrench across the side console. "If I burn out on entry, I want to fly out in pieces, not get scraped from the walls." The rig didn't respond. It was too old to talk back. It groaned with every pressurized shift, bolts squealing like wounded animals. Torb strapped himself into the flight harness and yanked the release lever twice. The floor jerked, the boosters caught, and the entire ship heaved forward like a drunk punched awake. The payload rattled behind him. 4 compressed rods of kinetic mass, dormant now, but wrapped in reactive coils designed to ignite on terminal impact. No fusion, no warhead, just momentum and fury shaped into stone. He didn't smile. He never did, not on days that demanded legend. Above him, Cravexel spun slow and arrogant in the black, still dressed in ceremonial lights. Pilgrimage cruisers circled its equator, their soft glows flickering like dying candles. Torb wiped sweat from his brow, flicked the heads-up overlay to mark defense nodes, and muttered, "You picked a poor century to look holy." Zenvar scouts scanned for warships. They didn't watch for garbage. This wasn't a warship. It was a mining husk, rebuilt from discarded tech, armor made from transport bulkheads, re-entry gear, salvaged from a derelict colony pod. Its nav systems hiccuped every time he turned left. But it moved, and that was all he needed. Back in Earth's hidden command nest, Reth Velarn leaned over a silent feed, watching the blinking tracker Torv had swallowed 3 days ago. He said nothing, just watched it move closer to the moon with an impossible rhythm. Behind him, Saren whispered, "They still think it can't be touched." Reth didn't turn. "Then we show them it bleeds dust." Torb throttled up. The cabin shook. A pipe hissed beside his foot. Coolant spill. He reached down and kicked it, until the leak sealed from pressure alone. The chair creaked. The targeting array blinked orange. Proximity range, 7,000 clicks. The first drone ship peeled off from orbit, scanning his trajectory. He adjusted the course just enough to mimic a collision vector. The drone hesitated, calculated, ignored him. Second drone, closer. It scanned longer, registered the payload casing. No explosives, no energy signature, no threat. Torb slammed the override switch. Inside the ship, the rods began to vibrate. The casing around them melted, revealing layers of compressed alloy folded like geological strata. He'd packed them himself, one for each quadrant of Cravexel's heart. He flipped the comm channel open, not to Earth, but to open bandwidth. "Zenvar defense," he rasped. "I'm not asking. I'm showing." He accelerated. The drone reacted now, too late. It launched a charge, but Torb spun the rig in a corkscrew, half the hull shearing off against atmospheric drag. The screen fractured. He didn't care. He could see Cravexel now with his eyes. The moon loomed, still untouched, still whole. He screamed something guttural, not a word, not a war cry, just release. The rig hit orbit at a slant, metal howling against gravity, the rods glowing red. Behind him, alarms erupted. One of the coolant lines exploded. Flames kissed the cabin ceiling. He unstrapped, leapt into the cargo hold, and shoved the first rod into the launch cradle. It clicked once, held. He triggered the drop. It ejected with a long hiss, disappeared into the curve of the moon like a secret flung into memory. He did the same with the second, then the third. The fourth jammed. The cockpit wall tore open from pressure. Wind screamed. His lungs caught fire. He punched the release with both fists. The fourth rod tumbled loose, spinning wild. He knew it would land wrong. Didn't matter. Gravity didn't need poetry to do damage. He stumbled to the chair, strapped in sideways, and gritted his teeth until his molars cracked. Behind him, the hull began tearing. Outside, the moon started glowing. Impact. 1. Cravexel's eastern ridge split like cracked bark. A shock wave rippled across its surface, distorting the orbital lights. Impact 2 followed like a drumbeat. Central plateau collapsed inward, fissures opening along ancient catacombs. The third rod hit an old observation tower, once a beacon for unity, now a smoking column of memory. The fourth landed wrong, which made it perfect. It struck at an angle, dislodging the moon's stabilizer ring. That ring, heavy with ceremonial pylons, spun off axis. Gravity didn't forgive the mistake. The moon began tearing at its own seams. Reth watched the heads-up display flicker. The seismic graphs didn't make sense. Too fast, too deep, too complete. Saren stood frozen, not from fear, from awe. In space, Torb's rig shattered as he ejected into vacuum. The emergency suit flared once, not meant for survival, just for the message. He spun, weightless, watching Cravexel disintegrate in slow motion. The outer shell peeled away in glowing spirals. Dust turned orange, then red, then silver. A ring formed where a legacy once floated. He laughed into the silence, oxygen burning out of his tank. "Worth it," he said, before black overtook his sight. From Earth to the edge of the Concordium, sensors caught the moment. No weapon, no warning, just a ring, perfect in its asymmetry. Saren's voice was preloaded into the nearest relay beacon. His words flooded the frequencies as the shattered moon bloomed across every system. "You hit us with a fist. We made you kill yourselves. Touch our future, and we'll burn your past into the sky." Zenvar officials scrambled. No fleet ready. No target remaining. No way to spin what had already become legend. Back on Earth, children painted rings in the dirt with broken sticks. Old soldiers raised cups to nothing, then drank deep. Streetlights blinked red, then gold. Someone played Saren's line through public address systems, every syllable like a drumbeat. Cravexel was gone. History blinked, and Earth, unarmed, uninvited, had carved its name into the stars by dragging down a monument. "Let them look up," Saren said, chalk dust clinging to his fingers. "Let that ring remind them what arrogance costs." The words weren't whispered. They landed in the silence like coins in a graveyard. Earth's skies now wore the wound, a halo of broken moonlight arching above continents, casting silver scars across oceans, rooftops, and alleyways. Children pointed skyward. Elders wept without knowing why. Somewhere in the fields near Old Antaria, a man lit a flare just to watch it glow against the shattered crown now orbiting the stars. Torv was gone, but his name drifted through the airwaves in low mutters and toasts. No ceremony, just legend. They said his last breath froze in laughter. They said his ship didn't die. It roared until it dissolved. Inside Earth's central command hall, laser plasma displays flickered with intercepted Concordium dispatches. Zenvar voices crackled through corrupted channels. Counselor Vexel's speech was half-finished, cut by static. Civil alerts spiraled, directives contradicting themselves. One Zenvar district declared martial law, another surrendered to silence. The Empire hadn't crumbled in blood, it unraveled in confusion. Reth Velarn stood before the council table, not in armor, not in uniform, just in the coat he'd worn when this began, its seams repaired with thread from 6 wars. The crew surrounded him, each bearing the quiet of completion. Varric sat with legs up, watching an auto-scroll of Zenvar retractions. Auric leaned on the wall, scribbling the beginnings of a ballad he swore no one would ever read. Jano held a mug full of something flammable, and burned his tongue deliberately, as if pain confirmed he was alive. Reth spoke low. The moon was a throne, now it's ash in orbit. Saren stood by the viewport, hands in his pockets. "They'll lie about it, they'll try," Reth said. But a shattered moon speaks louder than a rewritten page. Outside, cities had begun to dance, not with banners or parades, but with movement. Street corners filled with singers, reciting lines from Saren's original poem, now etched in fire. Bonfires rose on rooftops, faces painted with streaks of coal. Across the old capitals, bells rang that hadn't sounded since Earth first joined the Concordium. The ring hung above it all, bright, jagged, impossible. On Drosari Prime, a Kulith envoy announced a suspension of all Zenvar trade, citing strategic misalignment. On the Zarek homeworld, a general stepped down and burned his oath mask. On Drathari colonies, old songs resurfaced, louder now, no longer whispered. And in the Concordium core, the remaining Zenvar council sat in fractured silence. One reached for a statement, another filed resignation. The third stared at the blank screen, unmoving, as if trying to will the ring from the sky. They could not. The broadcast came exactly one cycle after Cravexel's fall, a preloaded transmission seeded across border worlds and trader networks. It opened with silence, then Saren's voice, calm, unhurried, undeniable. You broke a child in front of the galaxy. We didn't scream, we didn't beg, we watched, and we remembered. Each word hit like weight dropped onto glass. You struck one, and we let you think it ended there. But every hand you tried to silence picked up a stone. Every lie you told became a torch in someone else's hands. You mistook stillness for submission. That was your final miscalculation. Across the stars, every screen pulsed. We are not chaos. We are memory with a hammer. Then the screen flashed a single image, the ring, orbiting where the moon once stood, and then it ended. No anthem, no logo, just silence again. Reth exhaled. Auric tossed the chalk to Saren. Got anything left to say? The boy didn't answer. He walked to the wall, found a patch of blank stone untouched by cables or wires. He stared at it for a long moment, then scratched a sentence across the surface. We fell, we rose, and we'll keep laughing as we break your pride. He stepped back, brushed the dust from his palms and nodded. Outside, celebrations grew wilder, but the crew didn't join. They sat in the control room, watching as history reassembled itself around a fracture. Torv's seat remained empty. Jano lifted his cup. To the junk pilot, who turned rubble into thunder, Auric finished. Varric smirked, and taught drones how to doubt. Reth raised a glass. To Earth. They drank, not to victory, but to survival stitched with defiance. As the hours passed, messages poured in, some curious, some in awe, a few afraid. No one challenged the result. One ambassador from a neutral system transmitted a private line to Reth. We never expected this from your kind. Reth replied with a single sentence, that's why it worked. Later, as the ring turned gold in the morning sun, Saren walked through the streets alone. No guards, no speech. A man in rags offered him fruit. A child asked to see the cut on his lip. He just smiled. The ring shone behind him like a wound healed into legend. From now on, every species who gazed into the night would see Earth's mark etched above them, a message written not in fire, but in will, and they would not recall the strike. They would recall what rose in its place.